Hello everyone and welcome back to The Opinion, the talk show where your opinions matter. I am Mirna Santiago, and joining me for our discussion today on immigration is my co-host Adeline Ortiz and our guest panelist for today, Professor of Latin American and Puerto Rican Studies, Dr. Andres Torres. Welcome to the show, Andres.
Thank you.
Well, before we get into our issue of immigration today, I just want to share with you some of our the feedback that we received from our last show on our N-word discussion. Anna from Queens wrote to us, "What happened to good old-fashioned freedom of speech? As long as it doesn't cross the line into hate speech, people should be able to call themselves whatever they want." And Angel from Stamford, Connecticut said, "Growing up in East New York, it was very common to us to call each other niggas. Once I joined the military, however, I was very strongly told that the word in any form was unacceptable." And Will from Brooklyn said, "It depends on the intent behind the usage of the word. The brothers around the way clearly don't mean to offend each other, whereas the woman on Madison Avenue clearly meant to be offensive and hateful." And what most people don't realize is that black men, particularly in the urban centers of our community, are starting to educate themselves. And what they've found is that the word negus, N-E-G-U-S, a Nigerian word that is pronounced niggas, means king. And they're calling themselves that as a way of removing the poison from the word and turning it into something positive.
Wow, I mean that's really informative.
We learned something new.
Yeah, we should have had Will on the show to talk about the N-word.
So.
Now let's move on to immigration, shall we? Our specific topic today for immigration is what is it that undocumented immigrants contribute to our society and what do they detract? Now, before I get into my opinion, I do want to issue a sort of disclaimer, if you will, and that is that I come from a family of immigrants, and it's recent immigrants. It's immigrants within the first generation, to be quite honest. I think, though, that it's very different now from when my parents came here 40-something years ago to now in the post-9/11 era, where we can't simply assume that people are coming here to work and to seek a better life for themselves and their families back home. It's very important to monitor who's crossing our borders and for what reason, because especially in the case of the 9/11 hijackers, where they came here on student visas, I think most of them, we educated them, you know, we provided services for them, and then they pay us back in the most heinous way possible. You also now have to consider not just the possibility of terrorism, but also the drug wars that are taking place right at the Mexican border with the United States in Jalisco, Mexico, where, you know, they're kidnapping American citizens and American officials and stringing them up from bridges. So I think there's a lot of hatred that's being expressed against the United States, and that means that we really do have to have strong immigration policies going forward, at least.
Well, again, I think that this is another example of where a small minority has cast a really negative blanket on the whole. And I think that we need to address certain myths and misconceptions that exist with respect to immigrants, and that's that they're not all illegal. We should probably distinguish between legal immigrants versus illegal immigrants, and that is legal immigrants are here by permission of the country, and they're usually referred to as permanent residents, whereas illegal immigrants are undocumented or unauthorized to enter into the United States and do so in violation of this country's laws. I think that there are, nevertheless, that this is a sort of an area that the legislature has tried to regulate for over 200 years. It's something that's going to be with us for a long time, particularly post 9/11, and that it's something that we seriously need to address, and with respect to certain critical issues, but at the same time not necessarily look at it in that sort of immigration as a negative package or as the negative aura or stigma that has attached to it, especially after the events of 9/11. In fact, in 2011, Alan Greenspan stated in a report to the Senate Subcommittee on Immigration that there was some evidence that suggests that unskilled illegal immigrants marginally suppress wage levels of native-born Americans without a high school diploma and impose significant costs on some state and local governments. However, the estimated wage suppression and fiscal costs are relatively small, and economists generally view the overall economic benefits of this workforce as significantly outweighing the cost. So again, I think that one of the myths or misconception, if you will, is that immigrants do nothing but drain our economy.
Well, Andres, I know you've done some work on this issue, so I mean, do you have any thoughts on either my position or Adeline's position on immigration so far?
The history of this country is one of immigrants forging and creating a brand new country right outside of the Western civilization of the time, Europe and so forth. So ever since we gently and not so gently removed the land from the Indians and brought over our African slaves, who were, after all, the direct producers of the Southern economy, those were the originals here in this country, and with the settlers coming from England. But ever since the 1800s, most of the addition to the population of the United States has come through ethnic European immigrants. We owe a lot to that history. To start now turning the clock back and closing the doors, deporting people and so forth, would be an immense reversal, a U-turn to the history of our country, because for many economic and demographic reasons, we need this new immigration. The profile of the American population now is such that the great generation, as we say, of the World War II era are leaving their legacy as they pass on. The boomer generation, of which I am a part of, we're going to be stepping out of the labor force in the next decade and so. Just as many countries around the world, from Europe to Cuba to Japan, they face significant future problems with the aging of their populations. And so how do we replenish our population? We are not renewing our population level sufficiently enough from just our internal birth rates in this country to maintain the United States on a growth economic path.
Well, that's understandable, and I think it's unquestionable also that immigrants have really created this great country that we enjoy today. I mean, every advancement, whether it's been the railroad, the Empire State Building, everything else has really been built off the backs of immigrants, whether it was the Irish immigrants, the Italian immigrants, you know, the blacks that you mentioned. So I don't think we can take that away, and not to mention, you know, the fact, like you said, the original Americans were actually the Native Americans. It wasn't really the Western Europeans who came over here and sort of conquered. That being said, I think the era of the melting pot is over, because what we really have is sort of a hot mess. It's not really a melting pot anymore. We just have too many people. Like right now, you're saying that we're not replenishing the workforce based on the numbers of people who are being born into the country, but right now we're overpopulated in this country. You know, the population growth and the people coming in, they are draining the resources faster than we can replenish them. And part of that problem is the illegal immigrant problem. It's not even so much the legal immigrants, the people who are getting permission. It's the people who are crossing the borders. It's the people who are overstaying their visas, their student visas or work visas. So that is something that really has to be curbed. Otherwise, it's going to be a problem.
Well, Mr. Greenspan, who you quote, is no raging liberal. He was an advisor to Ronald Reagan, President Reagan. He was head of the Federal Reserve Board, so he is very, very wise as far as the big macro picture of the United States. And he himself, in his testimony, basically, let's give him the word and assume that he knows. He's presenting a balanced perspective, okay? I don't think he's a balanced person. He's a conservative in reality. But let's say he is presenting a bipartisan view, and he himself points out that the effect of the undocumented on the labor market is marginal in terms of bringing down the average wage. And that really is the thinking. That's the consensus of most of the people who have done serious studies of the undocumented. Now, we also need to distinguish between the immigrant population and the undocumented, as you say, okay? And that's very important to do. undocumenteds make up only 5% of all the immigrants in the United States today, of all authorized immigrants, okay? People who are either on temporary visas, on work visas, student visas, or in the process of naturalization. They are a very small number compared to the total population of immigrants. And in fact, there are roughly 10 million undocumenteds in the United States. Now, what's difficult for a lot of people to, I think, grapple with is that a big chunk of those 10 million happen to be Latinos, who happen to be the fastest growing population in the United States. There are 50 million Hispanics in the United States. Only half of them are immigrants. Already we're into our second, third, and fourth generation. As I imagine the folks like myself and you are, we're the future of America in that demographic sense. Not the whole picture, but where the growth is happening. And to say no more after you've already been here several generations, after you've already played by the rules, your parents may have snuck across the border, okay? This is the problem that we have with the so-called dreamers. So let's deal with that. There are ways to get around that, but let's not demonize that small segment of the population who happen to come over in an unauthorized way, as many other Americans have. Okay, throughout American history.
And I agree with that. However, my number on undocumented immigrants, and I'm assuming in your line of work, your numbers are probably better than mine, but when I was doing the reading for this segment, my number is 20 million, that there are 20 million undocumented. And the problem with that number is not so much the undocumented people themselves, but the children that they're having. At least that's the problem that I'm seeing, Americans having a problem with, is that the undocumented themselves may not be able to get welfare, they may not be able to collect Social Security, but their children, because they are American, can. They can collect welfare, they can collect Medicare, they can collect other benefits, and the Americans tend to feel, well, you're taking that away from me. I'm paying my taxes, you're coming here illegally, and now your children are using up my resources.
Well, actually, Mirna, see, that's based on a presumption that immigrants are not also contributing to the tax system. And in fact, there's evidence that immigrants are contributing to the tax system in many ways. They pay income tax, they pay sales taxes, they have individual tax identification numbers that they pay under. In some cases, they're even paying under false Social Security numbers, but they're paying taxes. They are contributing towards our tax system. They are contributing towards our welfare system. They are contributing in a number of ways by paying taxes into various American systems. However, they don't benefit from paying those taxes, because in many cases they are ineligible for state and federal programs that would benefit average Americans and U.S. citizens, or even legal permanent residents. However, the undocumented, while they are contributing towards our tax system in numerous ways, are not able to take advantage of those. So essentially, they're the ones giving in some sense and not getting anything back.
Well, I think that may be arguable too, because I think my initial point was really that once you have children in America, and that's, I'm okay with the fact that if you have children, then those children are natural born Americans and they're entitled to all of the benefits of this country. I know there are some people in the conservative sector who would strip them of that right, and they're saying, well, you're not a natural born citizen, your parents snuck over here illegally. But what we're seeing now is sort of a burden on even the foster care system, where you have undocumented immigrants, they get caught for some other offense, and what they're choosing to do is to leave the children in foster care because they want their children to benefit from the American education system, from the American system. And it really becomes a question of, okay, at that point, then what are you contributing? All you've done is come here, you've had your children, and now you're leaving them for us to take care of. And I do understand what you're saying about paying into the taxes, the sales taxes, and you can't buy anything without paying taxes. But I guess it's sort of that cost-benefit analysis. And I know you had a question you wanted to.
Actually, I think that we've addressed that sort of cost-benefit analysis with respect to the comments that Dr. Torres has made and mine, as well as Alan Greenspan's testimony to the Senate subcommittee, that at the end of the day, the benefits significantly outweigh the cost of having these illegal immigrants come in. They're not displacing American workers, as is yet again another misconception, that immigrants come in and they take American jobs. Well, they're not becoming the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, okay? They're not coming in and taking the lawyers and the doctors' jobs and so on and so forth. They are, for the most part, from low educational levels. They're coming in here, and the jobs that they're looking for are small positions that would probably be the average high school student type job. And that's even if they can get it. In truth, it's the companies who exploit these workers, who are bringing them in, who are paying them, you know, under the covers or the tables or what have you, and who are not claiming them, who are not contributing towards workers' compensation and other insurance and so on and so forth, and providing, you know, I guess the fair wages that these immigrants would be entitled to. Really, who are the criminals here? Is it the immigrants who are coming in and who are willing to work 16, 20-hour days for a few dollars at the end of the day? Or is it the companies that are exploiting them and doing that so that they can benefit, so that they don't have to make their contributions into the various tax systems or insurance systems that are in place for American companies?
If I may add to that,
Go ahead.
I'm glad that you brought in the other side. This is a straight economic situation here. There's supply. Those are the workers, the immigrants who are coming in. That supply would not appear, it would not materialize if there weren't a demand for that supply. The only reason they are coming over, okay, is number one, on their home side, there's extreme poverty, low wages, and desperation in a lot of these Latin American countries. And I'll be concrete here. 70% of all undocumenteds are Mexican. They're right on our border. A century ago, our main immigration problem of undocumenteds were French Canadians who would come into New England. That's why you hear a lot of French names in New England towns and so forth. The governor of Maine, Paul Lepage, is French Canadian origin. He is now one of the most anti-immigrant governors that we have.
Really?
His grandparents came over, okay, in the late 1800s. So I oftentimes contrast a governor like Paul Lepage with former governor of ours, Mario Cuomo, also third-generation immigrant, Italian-American happened to be. What an incredible difference between two views of what this country should be all about. Now, there have been very progressive French Canadians, and there have been very conservative Italian-American politicians. So it works both ways. It's just that we need to be with a vision of where this country's going that, yes, sees long-term how we're going to grow, maintain our history and so forth, but not be inconsistent in terms of our principles of an open door, especially in this incredibly globalized world.
Putting those views aside, actually, I'm sorry, Mirna. Putting those views aside, I mean, let's just look at those two. I mean, they've come here, they have achieved academically, okay, in terms of their professional careers, government, politics. They're lucky to be in a position to share a view. And why? Because this is America that embraces that immigration and that provides those opportunities. And it's exactly what this country should continue to do.
Well, we are kind of ticking down on our time for immigration, but I did want to ask you a quick question, Andres, if you could sort of wrap it up to us. What is your feeling about this recent crop of I guess, laws all over in Arizona and Alabama, where they're trying to limit the rights of undocumented immigrants? They're basically trying to, you know, kind of push them out the door by not giving them identification, not giving them the right to, you know, to get social services for their children, even who may be American born. What are your thoughts?
I think they're terrible. And it's all part of an across-the-board push by conservative activists and leaders and so forth who, on a whole range of issues from vaginal probes and anti-gay legislation and starve the beast, you know, that's what they call budget cuts and austerity programs, and of course anti-immigration fits in perfectly with that, to make a stand from their view of America, the beautiful of the past, not of the present and the future. Like they say, we want to take back America, okay? And this is the big choice that we have confronting us as a society. Which way are we going, forward or backward, toward a country that keeps its promise, that reflects the real world that's changing out there? We have an incredible situation here where we are more and more representing and reflecting the real world. It's going to be countries like China, Japan, and so forth that in the future are going to be stuck because they are refusing to loosen up and diversify their own costs. Exactly. That's not the way the world is going. And that's, to me, where our country can really be a pioneer going into the next century.
It's something, it's an issue I think that's going to continue to be debated for a very long time. And what is the answer? Legalization, deportation, amnesty, a fence along the U.S.-Mexico border? Who knows? I'd love to hear from our viewers on this one. So if you have any ideas about how we should deal with the issues of immigration in the United States, please do send us an email. Check our website.
Well, that will do it for us for the immigration component of our discussion today. But as always, we do have a lightning round, and it's a somewhat related topic, and that's whether Puerto Rico should become the 51st state. I mean, this has been up for debate for years and years now. So, Adeline, I want to hear what you have to say.
It feels like it's been an issue for my entire life. I've been hearing about this issue forever and ever. And the short answer is absolutely yes. I think it should become the 51st state of America. But it's funny that I was discussing this issue with a friend, a Russian woman, the other day when at my children's school, when the janitor came over. And he said, oh, they might as well go ahead and make Puerto Rico the 51st state. All those rotten Puerto Ricans are already here. And he had no idea that I'm Puerto Rican. And this woman who does know just looked at me like in panic, like, oh my God, what are you going to do to him? And of course, I had plenty of ideas of what I should do to him. But that aside, I thought that it could only be a good thing for Puerto Rico. I think that it would reduce poverty. It would increase educational opportunities and educational levels. It would give Puerto Ricans the opportunity to vote in presidential elections. It would give Americans more of a free reign to establish more companies and businesses, corporations on the island, which is a beautiful place to establish companies, and many companies are already there. But significantly, it would also create a right of those corporations to start paying federal taxes for their existence there. Many of the companies that do business there now don't even have to pay, or are nearly 100% exempt from federal taxes. So you know what? That's another big way that they could certainly contribute towards enhancing the island rather than doing business there and not giving as much back as they could be giving back. So I think yes, my vote is yes.
Oh, my vote is no.
Oh.
And I honestly don't think that Puerto Rico should become the 51st state. When Puerto Rico became a Commonwealth, I think back in 1952, there was really an advantage to having it there because you had the ships and you had, we had just gotten over World War II. There's no advantage now. There's no military advantage to having an island or to having, an island that sort of blocks any sort of invasion by Navy. It just doesn't happen. And not to mention the fact that Puerto Rico has, I think, 4 million people, and there's only 1.5 million jobs. So more than half of the population is either unemployed or underemployed. So where are they getting, and I think the median salary for the year is like $17,000. That's like below poverty level. So what you're doing is you would be adding a state that's not really contributing anything. You're going to be sending out more resources. You're going to be providing food stamps. You're going to be providing welfare, and you're not getting anything back. Other than maybe a little bit of a tourist industry, which I guess is already there, but they don't pay a lot of taxes on it. So my vote is no. I don't think it should become the 51st state. Andres?
Well, our viewers are going to get the full spectrum here because I think that Puerto Rico definitely should not become a state. It should actually enhance its autonomy much more significantly. Puerto Rico is a Latin American entity. It was a colony of Spain for some 350 years. It was part of Latin America all that time. It has been a colony of the United States. Everyone agrees, even the statehooders, that right now the actual political status of Puerto Rico is a de facto colony. But during that 100 years now of U.S. control over that territory, Puerto Ricans have not given up their language. They speak Spanish. They have not given up their Latin American culture. They have been able to resist several efforts by U.S. educational systems to force feed education in English. That was prevented. They just totally ignored it. That was back in the 1920s and again later, a few decades later. So in their heart, in their soul, they're not American in the sense that, especially in the sense that we have been talking about earlier with the immigration issue. Not only do they not identify as Americanos, North Americans, the relationship with the United States has forced them into a situation of horrible dependency. Dependency, we think of it here as like giving handouts, welfare and so forth. Dependency, the flip side of dependency is control. The U.S. has always wanted to control that territory for the many benefits that you've even mentioned in the past, but for on its own terms, so that businesses could go down there as a tax-free haven, so there would be a military security point and so forth. That has not worked for Puerto Ricans. Puerto Ricans need to stand on their own. They need the challenge of forging their true future as an independent, autonomous entity. Now that could be either a nation, an independent country, or it could be in some revised, associated sovereign status with the United States, which now has a 100-year relationship. So these are very complicated issues, but
we're actually out of time.
We're running out of time, and this weekend we have a Puerto Rican, the beginning of the avalanche of Puerto Rican parades throughout the United States. So it'll be an opportunity for everyone to catch up on that.
Well, folks, that is really all the time that we have for today, and I hope everyone out there has enjoyed our discussions on immigration and whether Puerto Rico should become the 51st state. And we hope that you will join us for our next show, where we will be discussing the media's manipulation of the standards of beauty. And that promises to be an interesting show, so send us your thoughts, your opinions. We look forward to hearing them. Thank you all for watching.